Coming up on Path to Zero.
We can build that we can use all of these forms of energy, and that will benefit us from the standpoint of affordability, security, as well as sustainability.
Welcome to Path to Zero, the podcast about clean energy and the journey toward a low-carbon future. Your host is Tucker Perkins, President and CEO of the Propane Education and Research Council. Now, here's Tucker.
Hello and welcome to Path to Zero. Natural gas continues to play a major role in the energy system, but there's increasing attention on how to reduce emissions across the value chain while maintaining affordability and reliability. Our guest in this episode is Bob Stout, a senior advisor to the Natural Gas Innovation Network. Before his current role, he spent nearly 3 decades in leadership roles at BP, working at the intersection of policy, industry, and emissions reduction. Bob, it is so nice to have you here on our special CERAWeek Houston edition for Path to Zero. Thanks for being here.
It's great to be here. I really look forward to this, guys. It's been a great week, and we're going to end at on a high.
Well, let's talk about the week, because you were here speaking. Your topic, I think, was Bridging Divides for a Prosperous and Sustainable Future.
Yes.
Tell us about the talk, how it went, kind of how the buzz is around CERAWeek.
It went great. As to the talk, and I had an amazing set of panelists. John DeBar runs the National Petroleum Council. A guy called Luke Bolar is a good friend from a center-right climate group called ClearPath, which is all about innovation.
We had him on the podcast.
Oh, good. He is awesome. And I would say we touched on a few things. Number one, I think we're in an evolution, and I think this can be a unifying message, where everybody's realizing the big priority for this world as to energy is energy security and reliability, 1, energy affordability, 2, and those are always going to be the big priorities, but we can weave in sustainability, number 3. But you have to address the first 2, security and affordability first, in order to get into the sustainability conversation. We talked a lot about that. We talked about energy poverty. We talked about the fact that, you've got 2 million people still burning wood in the world. All of those messages that Chris Wright has put forth, those shouldn't be divisive messages. They should be ones where we say, yes, we need these things, and now let's have the sustainability conversation, but make it realistic.
Why do you think it has taken, I would argue, 2 years? It took a change in the presidential election. It took a nation talking about the issues, but affordability, in your list just then, affordability was number 2. In my list 4 years ago, affordability was still number 1. You couldn't have a prosperous nation if you didn't have affordable and accessible and reliable energy. But why do you think it has taken a complete relook to bring affordability into the forefront?
Well, the world intervenes. I mean, as you ask that question, of course, this is more recent. If you look at what's going on, and how many years have we talked about the Straits of Hormuz, and that's an insecurity point. We see that right now. But I think, events have overtaken and shown us how clearly this is. I think on the security piece, of course, we live in an insecure world, and we see that, and I think people are waking up to that. I think affordability has always been there, and So the way that I look at it, too, is it just became a disjointed conversation, so that there was emphasis on climate change. We have to address emissions. That is really important. The other thing I'm going to say, polarization, I think, is one of the biggest things. So people started taking sides on good energy and bad energy, whichever side you were on, fossil or renewable over here. And then they took sides on, are we going to worry about climate, or are we going to worry about affordability and reliability? And all of those things, these are dialectics, these are dilemmas that we have to bring together, and it has to be one conversation. I think that's the big things that has changed. Those drivers have always been there.
And as I've always said, those choices are not binary. You said it in your opening
100%.
statement. You can get affordability, security, and sustainability. You just choose the right fuel. In fact, let's go. You are a great representative of the natural gas industry,
Yes.
and I hope by definition, the natural gas liquids industry, which includes our propane part of the barrel.
Yes.
But I would argue to my grave that fossil fuels aren't equal. Coal, oil, and wood, they're fossil fuels. You make electricity from them. it's really dirty. Natural gas and propane, I would say, have been blessed by chemistry. They too are fossil fuels, but a very different type of fossil fuel.
Yes.
And so it's always struck me that we're lumped into that fossil fuel barrel that says all fossil fuels are evil.
Yes, it's another oversimplification. They are not all equal, and I've said for a long time, because I was in the public affairs field, and I believe deeply in gas, and I think those who wake up every morning worried about climate change and the environment, and by the way, there are a lot of Republicans that are worried about that too. Boy, they ought to love gas, you know? The stats show very clearly, I was on this National Petroleum Council study, the benefits that gas brought to the power sector in reducing emissions. But it's also reliable and dispatchable. It plays well with others, as they say, when you're talking about working with renewables and all the different sources. And one other thing I want to touch on that I think is really important is our ability to measure those emissions and verify them, whether they be, at the point of looking at the CO2 emissions when you're burning it, but also the methane emissions along the value chain. Our ability to do that and do it reliably so people can believe in it has grown a lot. And so that lets us tailor our strategies to take away even those residual emissions, which are significant in some cases, to understand them and address them. So again, it becomes a unifying conversation. And I work with environmental groups as well as companies that are coming together and saying, let's use innovation to detect, measure, and mitigate, drive down these emissions, and that'll make gas an even stronger part of our energy mix.
And to your point, we've come a long way in detection, measurement. I mean, if you look at studies, depending on whether you're for gas or against gas, the percentage of leak has been all over the board.
Yes.
Are we tending to trend to a number now? Do we believe that number is 2% or 3%, or do we have that data yet?
This is a great question. I think it's trending lower for sure, and there are a lot of studies showing that. And it's not surprising because we see and know what the industry is doing in this regard, particularly the leaders.
Right.
But one really important point is the variation in the methane intensity, not just by basin, Permian versus Appalachian, that is a difference, but right down to which particular field, which particular producer. There is very wide variation.
Right.
And I work a lot with scholars at the University of Texas at Austin, and they're showing this. The other thing they're starting to show, a new study will be coming out soon, is they actually now are able to measure those emissions across the path from production, say to a data center, using publicly available data on intensity and so on. And again, it varies quite widely.
Yeah.
Let me mention one other thing that would be a surprise. There's a lot of focus on carbon capture and storage. That's also developing, which would reduce the carbon emissions at the burner tip. But if you look at the benefits of that versus reducing methane intensity, because methane is such a powerful greenhouse gas pollutant, they're almost equal. And that would surprise people because the carbon emissions are much larger in volume, but methane has a huge global warming potential. So those are a few things that are surprising, but as we measure this, we're finding them, and I think they're important to keep in mind.
Yeah, really important work. Why do you think the industry, which has such a great PR machine, capable of telling their story, this is a story they've really failed to tell, I think, is their steady progression in leak reduction, in carbon intensity. I mean, it's an amazing story if you think about it from the wellhead to the burner tip. I know the story, but they fail to tell it. Why do you think they've done such a poor job?
That is such an outstanding question. And I'll say, I could tell we're aligned on this. For many years when I was in the industry, I used to say, gas is the most incredible candidate I've ever seen without a good story and campaign. Yeah. And actually, maybe kind of analogizing it to what happens in political campaigns. It's not about how much money you spend and what machine you have. It's about, can you tell the story
right.
in a simple, credible way? And I see, for example, my friend Mike Summers at API, he's doing a great job on the communications side, as to gas in the industry generally, even linking into Landman. So I think we're getting better at it. But I think I do think it's a lack of the storytelling. I don't think it's just the data. And I also think this is where it's so important to reach out to spokespeople of diverse backgrounds, not just industry people. I mean, I know people in the environmental community that can tell this story very well too. But I think that's it. But it has been very surprising to me, but I do see that changing now.
That's great. We haven't really talked much about Natural Gas Innovation Network, but you talked in your opening statement about working hard to bring together people who are very pro-gas and very anti-gas to talk about the story of American energy. Yeah. How do you do that, and kind of how does Natural Gas Innovation Network play into that?
Yeah, it's a great group, and we've got ExxonMobil, BKV, and we also have Southern companies. Williams. So we've got kind of the buyers and sellers and across the value chain, and some of the technologists. And the story that we're telling is really about the innovation and how our members are going out and actually tracking these emissions using a variety of different technologies and driving down the emissions, but not just that. And that's why it's the Innovation Network. They are also recovering valuable products. Sometimes we forget that these methane emissions, worried about from a climate standpoint, it's product.
And nobody wants that leak.
Nobody wants that, and it's at scale. Here's an example. I co-authored an article in Barron's with a colleague of mine at the Colorado School of Mines. If you look at the amount of gas that is lost using various publicly reported statistics every year, at the low end, it's the entire natural gas production of Alaska. At the high end, it's the entire production of the Gulf. And if you look at predicted growth and demand for data centers, through 2030, S&P data, as much as a third of that could be satisfied by this. So it's how can we use innovation, how are we using innovation, and getting policies that encourage that, not prescriptive policies, policies that actually support that innovation by our members.
It's an amazing story. It's also an American story. I mean, I think if you look at the story of America, and I say today with the Middle East, everything that's going on there, Americans are in a fundamentally different place than, frankly, the rest of the world, the Europeans, the Asians, even the Africans. There's so much reliance on that.
Yes.
How do we tell first Americans the story of how natural gas has really made our country stronger, more prosperous, not just as individuals, but as companies and as GDP? But then how do we translate that so the Europeans begin to see the value of natural gas? I mean, obviously the Russians see it to a degree, the Venezuelans have seen it, but natural gas is primarily an American story.
Yeah, it is. Although, gosh, they need it, and increasingly they're recognizing they need it. And one thing I want to say is, people talk about energy dominance, American energy dominance, and that is an American story, and it's a powerful advantage. But that doesn't mean we're not helping the rest of the world. We are helping the rest of the world.
Absolutely.
Both by producing the gas that they need, and increasingly they're using it and so on, and also the innovations and the technologies that not only help us, but help them manage that process, help make sure. I talked to a gentleman yesterday whose name, but he came from a major company, and I was talking about this issue. He approached me and he said, some places we're losing 49% of our gas to the air. That's a big problem. So can I talk to you about how you can help us? That's an American story, using our innovation to provide the product and also help the world manage it in a safe and sustainable way.
Such a solvable problem, too. I mean, I think that's the problem.
100%.
Today's technology can address that. We think about data centers, and 3 years ago, we didn't talk that much about data centers. They were just kind of in the wind. Right. But today, it's a real thing, right? They're coming. They're in demand.
And we're in Virginia. We see a lot of them.
We are the king of it, right? Although we sit in Texas, which is pushing pretty hard.
At the moment, that's
to
right.
be number two.
That's right.
But the conversation clearly today is around the power comes from natural gas.
Yeah.
I often think we're not building a lot more pipelines. Don't really know that a lot more are going to be built just because of the general permitting issues and the need for permitting reform, which I tend to believe may or may not come. So I feel like we're going to be at a point soon where there's a demand for natural gas, there's available natural gas, but we're in the same position as the electric industry finds themselves, woefully short infrastructure. Do you see a breakthrough in that over time?
Well, I don't want to argue with your premise because any realistic person and knows the political process would say we may not get permitting reform, but we have to get permitting reform. We have to find a way to build these pipelines. And here again, I see some positive indications on left and right that people recognize that. It's absolutely critical. And I think it's critical for us as a democracy to show that we can produce the infrastructure we need to deliver what we need. It's a different situation when you're in an autocracy or whatever, like China. They get to scale things up however they want. The government can run. We have to prove that we can, through American democracy, but we can adapt and we can allow ourselves to build. I believe we can do that. I think it's becoming increasingly important. Increasingly obvious how important that is for the reasons that you articulated. The other thing I'll say is it also requires, speaking of communications and storytelling, it also requires, and the NPC, National Petroleum Council study pointed this out, that we work effectively with local communities that are affected. And that doesn't mean rolling in just as you're doing the project or you need the permit. Absolutely. It means spending time with them because those people, they're like us and they have their concerns. And same with data centers and AI. We can't let our desire for speed, which we need to have, and performance, we can't let that tell us that we don't need to talk to the communities. And there is a piece of that. No matter how much you reform, you got to get out there and make the case to people and show the benefits, and the benefits are there.
Absolutely. Do you think the 60-day waiver of the Jones Act, which is very temporary, do you think that could be an indicator maybe of a long-term waiver, and then all of a sudden LNG, LPG can more easily be shipped into some of these starved areas like the Northeast?
Boy, I'd love to say yes, but I mean, It's hard. When you said earlier we may or may not get permitting reform, given my years of experience in the industry, when you're dealing with the Jones Act and those issues, I can't predict what would happen, but I would say from your mouth to the energy god's ears.
Yeah, it's been interesting.
Yeah.
You know, our listeners, I think, generally are savvy enough to kind of know the role of LNG, the role of natural gas in the U.S. Yeah. But we sit here today at a point where LNG and LPG both are really being exported in record amounts to a world that needs it. Frankly, a world that may not have access to other forms of energy right now. Do you see that always will be able to be in balance? Do you worry about a world where exports are so prolific that it begins to starve American consumers, American businesses?
I really don't. I worry more about the fear and the perception of that, preventing us from doing what we need to do for our own economic interest, and that is, look how many years it took to finally get the ability to export crude oil. And the facts were there for a long time and the benefits, and look how much we have benefited from it. This country has just an unbelievable ability to continue producing that energy. How long ago were we talking about running out of oil and running out of gas? I don't think we will. So I think the main thing, this gets back to your point about storytelling, which I think is something we share. We need to tell that story about how we can have this abundance, which helps us both here and keeps our prices low in the United States, but also lets us export it to the world for our benefit and their benefit.
Yeah, I completely agree. Now, just a quick set of numbers. The natural gas industry probably today, I believe, exports somewhere 15 to 20% of the daily flow of natural gas.
Sounds about right.
The propane industry exports daily 65 to 70% of the daily flows. Yeah. And our industry has often said we export too much. But to your point, we can always buy those barrels, right? The U.S. market can always buy. I mean, it's what clears the market. It's what allows us to have low prices and robust supply. So I think I wanted to hear your view on it because I think a lot of people say, and you hear government every once in a while going, we should cap our ability to export. And I think from an economic perspective, even from the industry, that's a terrible idea.
And we Americans need to wake up to what energy poverty means, how people in the world live it. and the potential for alleviating that, for making people's lives better, the number of lives that are lost because of indoor air pollution around the world. And we don't tell that story enough, and it's really important.
And I would say one trip to Africa, you can see the front end of that.
Yes.
One trip to Germany right now, you can see the other end of that,
Yes.
where losing your energy, losing your industry, maligning your workers, whose now pay goes to paying increasing utility bills. It's both of those are, I think, equally terrible to see.
But
And
we
Americans
Americans
have never experienced that.
No, they haven't, but
Yeah.
we can square that circle.
Yeah, that's awesome. We have a great tradition on Path to Zero. We're going to hand you a magic wand. And that magic wand is to be used one time for one thing in the next 1 year to move the needle forward in an area you deem really important in this energy conversation. How would you use your magic wand, Bob?
I'm going to go broad. I'm not going to pick any one technology because I think we need many of them. I'm going to pick reducing the polarization, the binary thinking about energy, understanding really in our hearts and in our actions that we can build, that we can use all of these forms of energy, and that will benefit us from the standpoint of affordability, security, as well as sustainability. Coming together as Americans, having the difficult conversations about it. Not when you're talking about abundance saying, well, we don't need to worry about the environment, because of course we do. But also not when you're on the environmental side saying, well, we can't have this energy because we don't like it. Whatever. I think in all these matters, this polarized thinking is the greatest threat to us in this democracy. We need to get past it. We need to come together. The facts are there. The central narrative that I think, 60, 70% of Americans agree on.
Right.
So let's come together and solve problems around that. That's what I would wave that wand, and I'm trying to wave my little magic wand in that direction every day.
It's a great use of it. Do you believe, I think, I would say let's just stay with natural gas for a second. The pro-natural gas side certainly believes in natural gas. You said it yourself, it's but they believe in it because it's low carbon, it's sustainable. When consumed, when burned, it's a very efficient fuel. Do you think the naysayers to that narrative, do you think they just don't believe that natural gas has those attributes? Or is it possible they realize that's how you draw money into your foundation, and it's as much an economic machine as it is an environmental machine?
It's hard to generalize. I think motives are different. But I do think that there are a number of people, and I talk to them sometimes, who are deeply concerned about the environment, deeply concerned about climate change. And their theory of change is the only way to address that, because they believe, we're going to have to reduce the use of fossil fuels. The only way to change that, to bend that curve, is to get fossil fuels out of the system. I think that is a very mistaken analysis, but there are people who believe that deeply. And even those people, I think we need to have that conversation with them, and not as an industry just say, well, I'm frustrated, they don't understand the facts. Well, let's share the facts and let's talk about them. So I think it's a mix of things. There are definitely people, look, on left and right, who are making their money dividing us and arguing their cases, which are extreme. And I think you have that on both ends. We need to bring it back to plumb center.
Where do you see the natural gas industry in 30 years?
Oh, wow. I think it's going to be thriving. I think as we actually continue to prove the benefits, including the environmental benefits, I think it's going to play a critical part in the energy mix. And one of the things we know is we kept talking about energy transition. Well, it's actually energy abundance we need, and things don't change quickly.
Absolutely.
So I think, and I also think with energy insecurity that we're seeing now, the geopolitical situation, I think it's going to be increasingly critical in that realm as well.
A tradition we have, we love to plant a tree in honor of your time, your expertise in a national forest.
Yes.
I know you live in Northern Virginia, but is there a particular forest that comes to mind for you?
I'm so glad you asked that. I'm going to pick the Daniel Boone National Forest in Kentucky. I like to joke that I come from the extractives because both of my papas were from southeastern Kentucky and both were coal miners. And I still remember my dad's father coming home covered in coal soot and so on. So I have those Kentucky roots, and I would love it if it were in the Daniel Boone National Forest.
We will enjoy putting one there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bob Stout, Senior Advisor at Natural Gas Innovation Network, speaker at CERAWeek. We're so glad to have you on Path to Zero. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.